Hi, welcome back to part 2 of Robert E. Lee from the American Experience Storybook. What a splendid leader of those gallant Southern soldiers General Lee was. He knew just where to have them march, just when to have them fight, just what to have them do. Richmond in Virginia was the capital of the Confederate States, just as Washington is the capital of the United States. General Lee surrounded it with forts and defended it so skillfully that the Northern soldiers could not get into it, though they tried again and again. And whenever they tried to get through any of the approaches to the city, General Lee would march his soldiers against them and fight long and desperately. Boys, when they play at any good game, like a boy to be their leader. You can do so much better if you have someone to follow, someone who shows you what to do. It is just so with men, especially with soldiers. And General Lee was just such a leader. His soldiers learned to love him and look up to him almost as you do to your own father. They called him Mars Bob and Uncle Bobby, not to his face, of course, but when they talked together about him. He was so kind and patient and gentle. He was always trying to help them and cared for them so much that they knew he was their friend, even when he made them march the longest and even when he made them fight the hardest. But a soldier has to fight, you know. That is why he is a soldier. And although General Lee was always calm and quiet and gentle in speech and manner, he was a great soldier and sometimes a fierce fighter. One day, when there was a terrible battle raging, he saw his soldiers beaten back by the Union troops from a place he wished them to keep. They must not lose it, he said, and he waved his sword above his head and dashed to the front to lead his soldiers into battle again. But his men knew that General Lee's life was precious, and if he were killed, there would be no one to lead them to victory. "No, no, General," they cried. "Go back, go back. Lee to the rear. We'll take it." And when he dropped back, he saluted his soldiers for their love and care for him, and pointed at the Union line with his sword. "Forward," he said, and his men charging forward, thinking of their brave and gallant leader, won back the place from which they had been driven. Once, when his own son, who was also the commander of a large Confederate force of cavalry, as his father and grandfather had been, was in danger of being surrounded by a great force of the enemy, his father, the general, cried out cheerfully, "Keep your men together, General. I'll get you out of this." And he did. "General," a young officer shouted, dashing up to him just as a great battle was to begin, "the Federals are advancing." General Lee looked at him with a funny smile, enjoying the young officer's excitement. "Well," he said, just as cool and calm as you please, "I did hear firing, and I was just beginning to think it was time some of you lazy young officers were coming to tell me what it was all about." And I suppose that made the young officer laugh right in the edge of the battle, and to get from his calm and cool general all the more courage to do his best. So you see, while he was brave and serious, he could see the funny side of things too, and did all he could to make his soldiers bright as well as brave, hopeful when things went wrong, calm in the midst of danger. This is what makes a real soldier, you know. The North had more men and more money than the South. They kept on fighting too, for neither side was willing to give in. But the North for a long time could get no soldier who was as great a general as Lee. On the 3rd day of June, 1862, he was made General of the Army of Northern Virginia. That post he held through the war. Under the name, he led the Southern soldiers to battle and often to victory, while, by his wise way of directing his men, he kept the Northern troops away from Richmond for nearly 3 years. He won the Battle of Malvern Hill. He won the Second Battle of Bull Run. He won the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. Twice he marched his soldiers into the Northern lines, and at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania in 1863, he fought a terrible 2-day battle, which called for all the strength and all the skill of General Meade, the Northern leader, to turn it into a victory for the Union. 4 generals of the Union led the armies against him in 4 great attempts to defeat and conquer him. But each time, Lee was more than a match, and they fell back from Richmond, defeated. At last, in the beginning of the year 1864, General U.S. Grant, who had been a successful leader of the Union soldiers in the West, was called to the east to take command of the armies of the United States. Then there came a change. General Grant knew all about General Lee. They had both been in the Mexican War. He knew that to win, he must do his very best. When someone asked him how long it would take him to get to Richmond, General Grant said, "Well, about 4 days if General Lee is willing. If he isn't, well, it's going to take a good deal longer." And it did. General Lee did object. He objected with guns and swords and men, and the soldiers of the North and the soldiers of the South fought many terrible battles. The fighting grew fiercer and hotter. Grant would never give up, but kept pressing on. Bit by bit, the Union soldiers drew about Richmond. Bit by bit, the Confederate soldiers gave way as their money, their strength, and their numbers began to fail. But they fought gallantly still. General Lee was watchful and determined. His eyes saw every weak spot in the Union line. He could spread out his brave but tired and hungry soldiers so as to make the best show, and his men loved him so well and followed him so willingly that he was able to keep up the fight longer than any other general could have done. Never before in all the world had so many men been brought face to face in battle and dreadful battles they were, there in the swamps and woods and fields of Virginia in the year 1864. It was because both sides were brave men and because brave and great generals led them that these battles were so fierce. For Grant was bound to win and Lee was bound not to let him. But when at last all hope of successfully defending Richmond was gone, when the brave chieftain had tried to break his way through the lines of the Union soldiers who now surrounded his army and had failed, when he saw that to keep up the fight any longer was only a useless killing of men, a thing he always hated and tried to stop, then General Lee laid down his sword and surrendered himself and his army to his great foeman, General Grant, a man as gentle, as honorable, and as kindly-hearted as he was. It was a sad day for General Lee when he at last determined to give up the battle. At first, when one of his soldiers saw how useless it would be to fight any longer and told the general that he ought to surrender, the grand old soldier straightened himself up and said, "Surrender? No, sir. I have too many good fighting men for that." But General Grant had more, and so, as I told you, General Lee saw this at last, and to stop the killing of many more brave men, he gave it up. That is, he surrendered. It all came to an end at last at a place called Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. It was on the 9th day of April, 1865. The two generals met between the lines at a farmhouse near an apple orchard and talked it all over. Both were glad to stop fighting. Both were proud of the heroism of their own men and proud also of the courage of the other side, for all were Americans. General Grant said to General Lee, "If you will only promise for yourself and your soldiers not to fight any more against the United States, that is all I ask." Lee promised, and so the greatest civil war that ever was fought was ended in the kindest way, just because both leaders were great as well as good, and when they made a promise, would keep it. Well, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed that story. And please reach down, click like, and subscribe to our channel. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.